bit cheeky, isn't it?
Oh no, it goes well, it's good.
Yeah, if it's a good one. So what they're saying is 76 was very good.
They try to reproduce
Right,
it,
okay.
yeah. Only sell it out through the cellar door.
I used to work for Foster's as well.
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was where he was working like a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
2 or 3 years
Yeah.
ago. HR, weren't you?
No, I was doing tax. My background is actually tax, and then I got into risk management.
With Paul Sherman?
Yeah, Sherman and I worked together,
Yeah,
not in the same
yeah.
areas. He was
Yeah,
in accounting,
he was in,
and funny, he never said boo to me until I mentioned something about footy one day. We're on this bus.
And then you were
Didn't
mates.
shut him up. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
All right, we'll kick this off. So we've got Ron, David, and Gary Nicholson boys. The name is synonymous with the Beaumaris Football Club. What we might start off with is just your earliest memories, and even before the club was formed, about the process about how that club came about, and then what were your options if the Beaumaris Football Club didn't come about?
Well, I suppose that's Ronnie to answer because I was 8 years old when the club was formed. I think Dave was 10, so Ronnie was a little bit older and probably in that area in the age of looking for a bit of sport to play.
Yeah.
There was no ovals around at all.
No.
And the actual footy ground was a swamp.
It was
wasn't
a
it?
swamp where I used to go and catch tadpoles. Look, as far as we know, and a lot of us from what we heard as young guys there, vaguely remember the fact that the RSL was organising it, and our dad, who was an extremely keen football follower and sports lover, to as an understatement, he would have gone to that first meeting that was held in '62 up at the RSL, and he would have been very keen for the three of us to have somewhere to go and play, and that was what the whole area was. It was a whole bunch of young families, and there was a cricket club which had been there for 20 years, which is amazing. It was set up in McDonald Oval, and it'd been there when the whole place was scrubbed, but there'd been no organised footy club, and kids were growing up, so the guys at the RSL got together and said, let's form a club, and that meeting was held in '62. As Davey said, it was a swamp. When they had the first game in April in '63, there was a senior team, a reserves, no reserves, under 17s, under 15s, under 13s, and Davey was captain of the Mighty Midgets that played on the Sunday, which
was the under 11s.
Yeah,
and we had our first game at Parkdale.
Yeah. So Gaz played in the Mighty Midgets as an 8-year-old, and then the first formal under 11 side in the club was 1976. So that structure stayed around for a few years. And the first reserve side started in '66. So we started with 4 teams, an oval with no fence, no lights, no canteen, and the rooms are about as big as Wayne's bar at the moment.
Well, that was the room. That was the home rooms. Where Wayne stands in behind the bar, that was the change rooms for the home team, and that was the equivalent. So then in between were the toilets and the equivalent for the... So at the bar was a door out onto the oval, and that was it.
And I gather the oval was quite a bit bigger than it is now.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was.
It's a monster.
Just a big round open space, that's basically what it was.
If you go to the tramway side and you see the hill, well, the fence was right at the base of the hill, which is another probably 15 or 18 metres out from where it is now. So, you know, you play under Mighty Midgets games and you play up and down the ground, and you know, if you kicked a couple of points, you're probably a chance to win.
And look, basically it was the trees weren't there. Those pine trees that went in were planted deliberately later on as a bit of a windbreak. Obviously there was no tennis club there, so because that came along in the '70s, so it was pretty open and just big. And we had to senior training. You had to try and knock off work and get down at 4:30 and do circle work, kick to kick, circle work, some laps, and be off the ground when it got dark. And I
There
remember
were no lights.
because there were no lights.
And then the seniors go and have a warm beer.
Yeah, yeah, and don't forget this is before 10 o'clock closing. This is back in the days of 6 o'clock closing, so the club had no licence, didn't have a fridge, no social facilities, so after game was the Bowie pub, and functions were at the the early president's place, Peter Eldred, as you know, when they won the flag in '65. His boast is that they had a function there 18 weeks in a row. They all ended up back at his place.
That was where the beer was after the game, basically.
Well, I still remember going into the rooms after watching a senior game, and the guys would open their kit bags, you know, rather than their old sports bag. They'd have a kit bag
With a couple of beers
at the end of the game, and they'd bring a beer out, but it was in the old
In the long
big
necks.
long
Yeah.
bottles. So they'd have
It
a warm beer.
It sat in their bag all
Yeah,
day.
have a
I
warm
was thinking
beer
that
after
on the
the
way
game.
down. The only time they ever had a social beer at the club rooms organised was Sundays. They'd come down in the old days of the Sunday barrel, but it was a few laps, and then I remember them having the kit bags there on Sunday mornings as well, and pulling out a bloke like Bruce Smith and have a warm beer there.
And then
Wrapped up in newspaper or
the
something.
first extension is what the rooms are now. So where the players get changed now, that was the first extension. So the bar would serve into there, but the players would come in after the game, and they had to have a quick shower, and the girls would stand out in the rain basically until, you know, because in those days you couldn't have women in the rooms after the game, and blokes would have a quick shower, and then they'd sort of yell out and all the girls could come in and have a beer. And so the rooms converted into the social room.
And Jerry Callanan said his greatest achievement down in the club was to get the ladies' toilets in there.
Yeah, well, that's right. It was pretty primitive facilities.
And that was mid-70s.
Yeah, I reckon they built that
was.
room in about 72 or 74.
The first canteen was run in '66, I remember reading in the annual reports. The lights didn't come till about first light didn't come till about '68, so we would have had 5-6 seasons without
Which would have just been the one light by the rooms.
Yeah, it was just one pole. And then, as Gaz said, 70 was the first extension. So it was pretty basic. In the early days, though, there were always women involved. All the coaches and the first committee, if you had a look at the social committee, it was Mrs. this and Mrs. that, and they had 10 or 12 ladies on the social committee. But the RSL was really handy in those days because the pub closed at 6, but the RSL was a club. So a lot of our functions were held up there.
Apparently they had very late meetings that went to 11
Late
12 at
meetings,
night.
sportsman's nights held. Sportsman's night on Wednesday nights, we had packed them. Used to get 200 there. Premiership celebrations, even presentation nights. We're all up in the big room up at the RSL for probably 10, 15 years. First 10 or 15 years of the club.
Because
So.
the RSL was kind of bigger there in that top floor. Down on the east side was just one big long room, so they could have functions there to cater for 200 people or more.
So obviously the association with the RSL was pretty tight for quite a long
Extremely
time.
tight. Well, look, it was founded by RSL guys, as we know. We discussed this through the 50th and at the RSL, and then the association continued. Our first coach, senior coach Frank Reed, became the secretary manager of the RSL for 10, 20 years for all we know, and he just loved the RSL, he loved the footy club, so we'd all end up there for beer on Friday night.
And it's probably fair to say that the RSL funded the footy club, certainly in that initial year, but probably for many years to come, where they gave a donation every year. The club didn't have, you know, they probably had a very meagre canteen, a little bit of membership from players, but there was no such thing as sponsorship in those days. But I know that the RSL saw it as their community duty to continue to make a donation to the club every year.
Mentioning the RSL, and Peter Eldred said that I think Bruce Ruxton must have been the president there at that time, or at least he gave his imprimatur to the start of the club. Gary, you tell a story about Bruce Ruxton and his influence on your family, but also I think what sort of influence did he have on the footy club?
Well, I don't know if he was ever a big part of the footy club.
Not a lot, except Bruce Smith told that story at the 50th about how he still remembers the day he was in Perth at a function and he was being feted as a Perth footballer, and Bruce Ruxton was at the same function, and 30 or 40 years later, after Bowie won that first senior premiership, and all these dignitaries are there, and Bruce Ruxton recognised Smithy and come over and said, "Oh, Bowie Football Club." You know, Bruce was captain, and he talked
I don't
about.
remember him being down at games. I must say.
Look, Bruce Ruxton has a lot of interesting stories about him, but we know him because our father was a returned serviceman who'd been wounded, and what people don't know is Bruce started off by being a bit of an activist in that on Sundays he opened his house in Bowie and people came round from 9 till 5 o'clock all day Sunday with papers and requests to help him fill in forms, what departments to go to pursue
pensions
and grants and everything else, and he did that virtually every weekend of the year, and that's how he got well known in the community. People pushed him up into the presidency, and so we all got a lot of time for Bruce.
Yeah.
And he was a very funny bloke
Very
to have a
highly
beer with
regarded,
too.
wasn't he?
Yeah.
Very highly regarded.
And his sense of community was outstanding. Is that he had a real, obviously, for anyone that had been near the war, a returned serviceman. You know, I think I told you the story that I ran into him in the Sydney airport one day, and I was with a fellow from New Zealand, and he said, "Oh, that was when Bruce was at the height of his popularity, if you like to put it that way." And Richard Carline said, "Oh, that's that Bruce Ruxton." And he walked past, and I said, "Hello, Mr. Ruxton," and he recognised me. He said, "You're a Nicholson, aren't you?" And he said, "How's your dad?"
Really?
How's your dad?
Yeah.
I said, "He's really, you're looking after your dad? If I hear you're not looking after your dad, do you know?" And here we were in the middle of Sydney airport and giving me a lecture. "Do you know what your dad did for this country?" But no, we all have very, very strong feelings for Bruce and for what he did in the community, I think.
Yeah, so going back to the first year and the start in the RSL, the first president, Peter, was a returned serviceman on the first warship into Tokyo Harbour. My coach, Ted King, the famous E.J. King, under 15 coach, he was fought in the desert against Rommel. Frank Reed, the first senior coach, was the senior Australian commanding officer at Changi for 3 years. Ronnie White, who we'll discuss a little bit later, who came in, was decorated as a 19-year-old, and as you know, just passed away a couple of months, 6 weeks ago, and highly decorated. He became the under-17 coach and then a senior coach. So not only were they RSL people, but they're great characters who left a real legacy for established a foundation for the club.
The culture.
Mr. Ted King to us was Mr. King for 10 years till we were mid-20s, and every kid at the club who grew up had so much respect for him that he was still Mr. King until they had kids of their own before they'd call him Ted.
I don't think I ever called him Ted.
And then the 65 first premiership, so you didn't have to wait too long for a senior premiership at least.
And I think we were all there. I was certainly there.
Yeah, well by then I was playing, in 65 I was in my second year of under 17s. You were under 13s last year.
13s, yeah.
Gaz, you would have been a young
I was still 9,
You would have been
10,
11
yeah,
and-
10 or 11, that's right.
So as young kids, how did you sort of see the senior players?
Well, we spent, my dad that was our Saturday afternoon.
Yeah.
We would go to the footy, and if it was at North Kew, we'd go to North Kew, and if it was a Baldwin, we'd go to Baldwin. That was just our afternoon, was to go to the footy and watch Bowie. And, Ron talks about Bruce Smith, who was captain of that first team, and he wore number 9. And David, for all his career, wore number 9, and then I followed through in number 9. And I always remember I was in hospital at about 12 years of age in the middle of town at the Iron Ear Hospital, and Bruce Smith came in to visit me, and he left a note, to one number 9 from another number 9. So he was captain of the club. He was in his mid-20s, but still had time for, him and my dad got on very well. My dad always got on well with the players, and so...
It's interesting in those days too how when you're playing in junior football, you'd invariably have most of the senior players there watching you and in the rooms before.
So the under-17s played before the seniors, is that right? Yeah, it was a very different setup. So that first day in April in 63, and we'll have that 50th anniversary soon, the under-13s ran out first. So the first bloke ever ran out in the jumper was Andy Sheldrake. He was captain of the under-13s.
That's right. I played in that team too.
And David played in that team, and Eddie King, Ted's son, boasted that he was the last one to run out because his dad told him that he had to defer to his elders and he was the youngest. So I played in the under-15s away at exactly the same time at East Brighton. Ted was coach and a guy named Paul Hankinson was captain. And then at home, the under-17s played at midday every Saturday.
Quarter to 12.
11:35. So they followed the 13s or 15s, and they were the curtain raisers of the seniors, and of course Mick Kirkby was the captain for the first 2 years of the under-17s and won the first 2 comp BNFs in those 2 years. and beat Alan Davis both times. So he was and we were all in awe of Mick, as I think even the senior players were. He was something to watch. He was
He's a legend, wasn't he?
quick as lightning and would knock up getting the ball all day. Just didn't have the best kicking style, and that's why when St Kilda recruited him, he didn't stay. He's probably his kicking. Yeah.
He was a great player.
So that's how it all started. It was years and years before Sunday junior footy started. It was years and years before seniors and reserves played on the same day. When the reserves started in '66, for another 10 years, seniors played on one ground at 2 o'clock and the reserves played opposite at 2 o'clock. It was really
Much longer than
strange.
10 years. I coached the reserves in '83 and we were still in opposite grounds. So mid to late 80s was when reserves started, because what it was that, so for many years there was a game of footy here every Saturday afternoon. So people that were local and just wanted to watch a game of footy, they'd come down, and either the seniors or the reserves would be there. So there would always be a game there, and that was certainly into the mid-80s before it was...
It was quite a hot topic. I was involved. I think I might have been a delegate, and I remember Mick Follett, who was president of Mentone, we knew well, and he said they were really against the reserves playing for the seniors. He said, it would cause trouble in the club, that the reserves would bag the seniors, and they'd be there saying, why aren't they getting a game, because no one was used to it. So a lot of opposition to it, but of course it's a much better way to do it, as well known.
I think one of the major oppositions was the clubs. It was a very strong bar. You were allowed to sell grog at the grounds in those days, and so clubs had bars going all afternoon, and they didn't want to close for a Saturday.
Presumably it was a league thing, though. I mean, it wasn't
by
the club.
It was most comps in Melbourne until that time.
That was the standard way.
Yeah.
And then junior footy developed, and more teams, and then they needed their own time. So I think the first move was juniors going to Sunday football, and then the debate followed that
freed up the ground a bit more.
How should the seniors and reserve structure? So, long time.
Still southeast suburban, and the juniors were playing on the Sunday, or did they go off to the Moorabbin Saints?
I reckon it was the Moorabbin Saints. I reckon it was when the Moorabbin Saints took over the juniors. About the same time, I think it went to the Sunday footy. Sunday footy.
So everyone played their junior footy and came up through the ranks in those days, and the mighty midgets were replaced by the under 11s, as I said, in '76, and in those days it was still 13s, 15s, 17s. There was still that 2-year gap. It was still a while before there were enough kids and enough to make a team for every year. And then it was even longer before we started having 2 teams in each. And now, of course, 4 under 9s and 4 under 10s, but that took ages to develop that. Yeah.
Did the 3 of you ever play together in a game?
I remember. Where did they?
North Kew.
Correct.
North Kew, yeah.
Correct. John Lawless was coach.
Yeah.
It was Bowie seconds. We were all getting at the end of it, I think. Lawless was coach, and I think he appealed to us all to... I think we were all training, and had you been in the first day? I couldn't remember the year, so... Well, I'll work it out. It was probably... So it's late Johnny Mack era of the early 80s.
Okay.
Yeah, so we went out there and had a game together, which was nice.
Just the one, or
like the Danaher's,
I reckon it
We
was
orchestrated it somehow.
I think Ronnie and I might have stayed in the reserves, and David probably went back to the first. I don't know what he was doing. He didn't have many games in the reserves.
Gary and I played in a few reserves premiership sides together in the 70s when the reserves had their golden period, played in about 7 grand finals in 9 years or something.
And then in '77 I played in the reserves premiership. David played in the first premiership, and Ronnie led the fight at quarter time. The first, with his suit on.
How did that happen?
Oh, it's a long story, but in '77, Andy Sheldrake had been vice captain of the seniors, and I'd been runner all year, and then Shelley broke his wrist, and obviously wasn't going to play in the finals, and offered the running spot to him to have him involved and give him a bit of interest, and he did that through the finals, and I sat on the bench as a selector. I was a selector, and along with Frank Reed, we were the 2 independent non-playing selectors. Kenny Peace was one, and Mick Shaw, and of course the coach Jerry. So I sat on the bench next to Jerry as the Graham Richmond with the old lapel, suit coat. And what happened, it was Bowie and Chadstone, top two sides, chatty, tough side, a lot of guys playing there, going to retire.
Mercenaries.
Definitely very highly paid. Eddie Mealy, captain coach, who was the face of ABC and VFA football on Sundays, frontman for them. He was captain coach. He'd recruited well. They thought that our soft spot might have been the punch up, and what they targeted was our full forward, Tony White, Ronnie's son. 6'6", full forward. He kicked about 70 goals at that stage. And in the preliminary final the week before, he had his eye open. He'd had about 8 to 10 stitches.
Big cut.
And so when he came to the game, it was all bandaged up, and they knew that. And just before quarter time, they synchronised the fight in several positions around the ground. And so people were wrestling and rolling and falling over, and it was all a cover for the old back pocket player, mid-30s, Tarzan Glass, son of a well-known Williamstown VFA football, tough family, and he was playing his last game, and his job was to go over and whack Whitey, which he did very well because he was covered in blood and had to leave and got taken down to Sandringham Hospital. Now, while the fight was on and the crowd was yelling, the noise was deafening, we were away from the crowd. We were sitting down on the half-forward flank, and we heard the siren go. So we, off the bench, went onto the ground. I was first out. As a matter of fact, David had been floored and he was on his back. I got out there and called the trainer over.
Jeez, he must have been a big bloke.
And then
the wind knocked him over, I think.
What happened was, after the game, the duty manager at the ground was a guy in his 60s from the South East Suburban officials, and he reported to the executive that I'd run onto the ground before the siren, because what happened with the noise, they blew the siren again about 30 seconds later because half the people hadn't heard it at the ground. And so I was reported for running onto the ground during play, and I went in and said, no, the siren. We had a witness. He came in his police uniform. He was a superintendent, like he was Bill Gooding. He was the straightest guy we'd know. Absolutely. He wouldn't come to a function at the footy club if we didn't have the right licence. That's how straight he was. And he came in his 4-star uniform as a witness to say he heard, and they wouldn't believe him because they said, oh, well, you're connected to the club, you've got a son playing in it. And so I got suspended for a year.
Suspended from what?
From being involved from any official role at the club.
You can still come to the games, I presume.
I could go to the game. I wasn't allowed
you
to.
You couldn't go on the ground.
I couldn't play or be an official. So, and that all came out of that. And that was actually, I think, was one of the incidents that started the souring of relationships between ourselves and the South East Suburban, which
led to us
leaving amongst. It was one of the first ones that people sort of took note of. Well, they wouldn't even believe that this police superintendent and wanted to take that negative view, and it was a very plausible story because there's probably 100 people there who heard the siren. There's about 2,500 who didn't because they were all bunched together and it was noisy, but they wouldn't believe us. Yeah.
Other than that, it was a good day.
So that's So
I think one of the melees in inverted commas was captured on Regis footage that we've got copies of. There is a fight in that.
From that day, yeah. It was at quarter time. It was at quarter time.
So it's built into quarter time.
Yeah.
So they were fighting everywhere. They'd fixed Whitey up. In those days, you couldn't come back on. So he went off. Peter Marsh drove him to... No, so someone drove him to Sandringham Hospital, dumped him there, raced back because they wanted to see the game, and he was found trying to walk from Sandringham Hospital back to the ground in his Bowie jumper, covered in blood, once he'd had stitches put in.
And this is at Wetherell Road, isn't it?
Yeah, and Peter Marsh, had been a senior player and the club secretary, happened to be driving to the ground and saw him walking along, picked him up.
I remember him at 3/4 time, he walking around Tony White in the huddle at 3/4 time back with his eye all bandaged up. And
why didn't someone just ring him on his mum?
Yeah. No, that was one of the great games I think the club's ever played in. The atmosphere. We're 16 points down at half time and they'd thrown everything at us and thought they had us.
Well, do you remember at half time too, where their whole club was celebrating?
They sang the song.
They sang the song. And I remember Jerry at half time saying, don't say a word.
Just listen to that.
Just listen to them.
And then he
said, when they finished, then he said, now I'll tell you how and why we're going to beat them.
He said they've played their game. They actually, you could hear someone standing up on a seat saying, the hat's coming around. So they were passing the hat around and singing the song at half time. They'd had a big breakfast because both clubs had seniors and reserves playing in the grand final. We'd knocked their reserves off by a goal. We played in that.
No, it's more than that.
No, I think we beat them pretty easy in there.
Oh, okay.
We beat them.
Yeah, I thought
beat them easy. But they turned up on a bus from this supporters breakfast, or in several buses, and they'd all had a gutful by the start of the reserve. So imagine what they are. They're selling grog up at Cheltenham. And so at half time they're all full of
celebrating,
singing, passing their hat around, and Jerry just told everyone to sit down, shut up and listen. So
also, Chadstone as a club, as a football club, had never ever won a premiership. Ever. And they went through that, and then by 10 years later they were folded. I see they've come back again in the bottom of the MOs. They've won
they're not the same.
in 4 years.
We've run into people from that club who've said that that losing that grand final to us in '77 finished them as a club. But it was a great day. Yeah.
And at Cheltenham, we had such a crowd there, of course, because it was local for us. And
it's almost, if you look at the footage, it's almost unrecognisable that it's Wetherell Road to me. I'm sort of thinking, where's
one of the rooms, and they see.
And what sort of crowd would you have got to the game?
There was a few thousand, and I remember
there was a lot of people
looking across, sitting on the bench to the other side where the hill was, and that was packed with cars and people. And they, about halfway through the last quarter, we were 3 or 4 goals up, but I know Jerry on the bench was saying, hey, this has got a long way to go, and as it turned out, they had a last dip, and our crowd started singing the song halfway through the last quarter over the other side. And I remember Stevie Caffin, one of our old mates, was over there leading him. I could see him. And
I'd like to know what the crowd was. It was several thousand.
That's why that noise I talked about when the blue was on. We were clearly the 2 standout sides. And a lot of local clubs that weren't in the comp came and had a look at the game to see what it was all about.
And then we went up to, under Jerry, we went up to First Division. That was Second Division South East Suburban Footy League, and it was First Division was pretty strong footy. And I think for the next, that was 77, so in 78 and 79, we both times made the finals, got beaten in prelims both times. Certainly one year by the team that went on and won the flag. Burwood beat us,
David was captain in 79.
Yeah.
We lost at
Parkdale. Well in front at half-time and didn't kick a goal after half-time.
I think.
No, at Sandy.
Burwood was Sandy, Parkdale was Murrumbina. So those 2 years.
So Jerry took us into 2 A-grade finals in a row.
Yeah, and then in 80, Jerry left, Johnny McNicholas came and captain coached, and we played in the grand final. And Ashburton had won the previous, had won a number of senior grand finals. They were a very strong, highly paid, hard, tough club. And we beat them in the second semi, which was probably, because we were so young, it was probably our grand final. We beat them in the second semi and then partied for 3 days like we'd won a grand final, and still had our chances on grand final day in very windy conditions up at Sandringham, and got beaten. And then, continued to play in finals for a number of years.
From 80 to 92, we played in. We were the first team to stay 13 consecutive years in A grade and played in 9 final series.
Yeah.
And unfortunately,
just couldn't win.
Some losing grand finals, 80, and then Johnny Lawless in 76 when we
86
had 30 scoring shots to 21, and got beaten. We kicked 8-22 to their 13-8, I think it was. So we're on the wrong side of that. But going back a little bit, you were asked about 65 and. We followed the seniors pretty religiously because that was what there was to do, and they didn't lose a game, and they were a great team, and they smashed the grand final, and they had some great players. Brucey Smith, the captain, walked into the first ruck job at Sandy. Bill Lockhart played Carlton, a couple of games, Carlton seniors the next year. He kicked 7 at centre half forward. Jeff Skinner, the leading goal, kicked the club record 112 and had his 18 in the game that year. Mick Kirkby, of course, coming out from the 17, so it was a really good side, and they took us up. And then the next year we started our first reserves side, and that was captain coached by the back pocket of that senior premiership side, Johnny McCormick.
Did he play in the senior premiership?
Yeah, he played the senior premiership. He was about 35. He'd been a tough old Federal League footballer, Macca, and he's a great bloke. And he played and coached the reserves in the first year. So the first game of reserves footy we ever had was down at Bowie. We played Kooyong and went down, and we had the awards in the Bowie pub that night. I played in that as a 17-year-old. So
did you win that game? Didn't
and we won, yeah. I got a pewter for the award for the first game.
Did you? Good on
First
you.
return.
Well done.
Yeah. So I love that. And so then we were in first division for a few years and struggled a bit and went back to second division in 70, and that's when we had our next flutter with a young 19.5 average.
Yeah,
So
very, very young team.
we were playing, I played a few games in the seniors, and by then David gone to bigger and better things over at St Kilda. 70?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It was
And,
David's
and
I
this
was
young-
when I was playing under 17s.
Yeah, and this young side got up and beat the unbeaten Dingley in 1970, and that kicked the club on quite a bit, and went up again, and unfortunately went straight back again. And so in 72 we're back in second division, and we started a run of senior reserves grand final, 6 in a row, 5 flags, and lost one narrowly, which would have set a lot of records if we'd won that 6-1.
Rossi Hartford was a coach.
Rossi Harford was captain coach at one stage. David Holmes was another one, and George Struce. They were the 3 guys who coached through
that era.
Through that era.
So Ross was a retiring, very, very good senior player.
Bench senior captain.
And getting older, and played all these footy in the seniors at centre half back, and then came back and captain coach at twos, and played most of his footy at full forward actually.
And with Mick Kirkby playing,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
a couple of really good senior players.
Older fellows, and then
come
a lot of
back.
young guys coming
And that
through
set
as
the
well.
reserves up, and so there was a good culture there then, very winning culture. And then at the end of 76, the reserves had won a game, but the seniors had finished. No, at the end of 75, the seniors had had a disappointing year under an enigma named Bill Turner, that we could spend an hour telling Bill Turner stories, but not much.
We're
Good.
trying to get his nephew back to play, so we won't bag him too much on here.
Okay, because I've heard the name referred to
Yeah,
as some
yeah, that's his
mysterious.
You
Yeah.
skipped over 67.
And 67 was the first ever junior underage premiership side, which was Davey's era, Davey in the centre, Wayne Judson, our first AFL and first Big V player, played centre half forward, centre half back.
Centre half back. Johnny Edwards, centre half forward.
Johnny Edwards
Yeah.
was captain at
Eddie,
centre half
Eddie
forward.
King roving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of.
It was a
football,
suit,
fantastic.
and the 3 sides, because again I was under 13, I was always 2 years behind David in the juniors. So as he went from one age group, I stepped into it. So we never played junior footy, but as an under 13, we watched that final series. Bowie snuck into 4th
Yeah.
spot with Ted King coaching, and they won the first semi easy, and then the 3 teams left were Beaumaris, East Sandringham and East Brighton. And I think between the 3 teams, you know, there might have been 8 AFL footballers and 20 Sandringham footballers, and it was, you know, Stephen Ray, we won it.
Shane Grambo.
Shane Grambo, that's right. It was
the
just,
Davies,
yeah,
one of the Davies.
and so we were certainly the 3rd ranked of those, and under Ted King's, you know, really astute coaching, they got up and won it. But then after years later, you realise that we also had Wayne Judson and 4 or 5 guys that played VFA footy then, which was pretty strong footy. And
I remember in that year that I think it was the 2nd or 3rd game of the year, we went out to East Brighton, who we ended up playing in the grand final, and they beat us by 15 goals.
15.
Yeah.
What people mightn't realise now, but back in those days, East Brighton and East Sandy were the 2 big clubs, but the competition, the under 17 competition of the South East Suburban, had won the Australian Championship several times.
Was regarded as
It
very,
was
very
the
hot
best
junior
competition in Australia for junior footy.
Yeah.
And Chris Judd's coming out of East Sandy, and Alan Davis was playing then, and so on. But
Carl Dittrich.
Carl Dittrich,
Joe Watson.
I think at least 4 of St Kilda's premiership side came out of East Brighton.
Oh,
Yeah.
At least. So it was very strong footy. So we were the new boys on the block and found it hard for a few years, but once we matched it up with them, and now we've become one of the
Yeah.
sort of strong junior clubs.
And
But
certainly in those days, under 17 was regarded as very strong footy, but a really prestigious premiership to win. Yeah.
Very. It was very hard to win the under 17 premiership, harder than probably any other team.
Yeah.
But that set us on the way, that under 15 side, and the juniors. I remember in '72 we had a big night at the RSL because we'd won 3 premierships in one day, and and that started happening on a regular basis. And our juniors just got better and better. But Ted King also went on and coached our first ever under 17 premiership side.
Yeah.
That guys like Kenny Peace were in, and a lot of I think half a dozen went on and played at Sandy. But against Ormond, who were undefeated, and one of their guns was Stephen Smith, who went and played 200 for Melbourne. So I think they got up and beat them. Bowie got up and beat them by a point. It's the first gun they lost for the year.
Black Rock.
Yeah, it was fantastic football, great football, but it just showed how good Ted King was at getting the best out of these junior teams.
Yeah, Eddie tells the story about that game, I think,
Does
and
he?
the
Yeah.
like after the game, the reception that he copped in the opposition change rooms, and I think Eddie saying he and Gary, I think, went into the change rooms afterwards, and they were catcalling him and whatever, and he eventually it all died down, and then Ted got up and actually spoke, and he said, "Gracious in victory." No, anyway, humble in victory, gracious in defeat, and just walked out.
But that was, as Ron said, they were undefeated, and it was a very, very good game of footy, and some real character. Ross Elwood played in it as he stepped up from the younger grade. That was his first game.
Nick Nicholas.
Yeah.
Peace.
Yeah. So again, and even back in the early days, and it's still prevalent now, but certainly not as much as then, is that through the 70s and the 80s probably, the makeup of the seniors was all kids that had played junior footy here. We didn't spend anywhere, even when we did start spending money, we were later than anyone else and spending a lot less than anyone else, and we just built our club around the juniors, which is, we learned how to do it because that's what we have to do now, is keep working on our juniors, because we're not in an environment where we can recruit a lot of players.
Our first payment was 1973 when we appointed the now legendary Peter McGeorge as captain coach. He'd been down at Black Rock, well known in Federal League, and for the princely sum of $30 a week, he was our captain coach. And that caused a big debate in the club. There were people who didn't want us to pay anything. We weren't an amateur club, but we're honestly operated as an amateur club, much more than any of the other clubs did. We always paid less.
Eddie King made the comment that his father had confided in that his great ambition was for the team, for Bowie to go into the amateurs and win a great premiership with junior players from the Balmoral club.
Yeah,
Have you heard
Eddie
that
had
before?
said that to me, many years even after his father had passed away.
Yeah.
Because the amateurs then was a very distant thing. The difficulty of going into the amateurs then is that anyone that had ever received $1 for playing footy anywhere could never play amateur footy. Now their view is, which I think it's the correct one, is what you did in the past we don't care as long as you don't get paid here. And that's realistic, I believe. But in those days there was never an opportunity for us, even if we'd been giving everyone $1 a week, they never would have got what they called amateur status in those days. So it was impossible until, so then we get to 95.
Yeah, but we grew up in district footy culture, and I still remember in those early, people would sometimes say, why doesn't this club play in the amateurs? And these were people who'd gone to the big schools, the private schools, and knew what the old boys were, and we didn't. Yeah. When we'd say, well, how does it work, what's it all about? I remember discussions, and not many people understood the ethos or the operations of the amateurs or what it was. And it was just
there were community clubs
involved. It may as well have been 1,000 miles away. Yeah. Ormond was, of course, and they became a famous club, and they were intensely disliked. People that we know from Ormond now, Matty Pettering's dad, Grant, and Russell Barnes and that, they were extremely disliked because they were successful and they weren't an old boy club, and all the old boy clubs hated them.
You might argue that's still the case now.
And that's still a debate. But
I think what did turn out once we went into the amateurs was that by nature we are an amateur club.
Yeah.
You know, by nature we're all about our juniors. We've never been big, even when we were a successful club. Even though we didn't win a flag through those 80s in South East Suburban and Southern Footy League, it was very strong football and we were very competitive, but we never did it on the back of big imports. You know, Toddy was probably the one really good player we got in, and I don't think we were paying him much. Lolis just annoyed him to hell and got him down here, but it was all guys from Sandy. We got a lot of players back, guys like John McNichols and David came back from Sandringham, having played there for 6 and 8 years, and brought guys back that were looking for a suburban club to play at then. So that was how we got Greg Barclay and Andy Easton, you know, great captains in our club, and that's how they came back through that.
Yeah, what happened was we got to that, Jerry's taken us from a battling second division club, premiers, 2 finals, and how was the next step going to happen? And it was presented by the fact that Johnny Mack wanted to captain coach and get involved with coaching. He was on 98 games at Sandy, so for him to leave Sandy meant he didn't get his life membership for 100 games.
Correct.
I remember that was part of a discussion, but he came back, and so that coincided with him bringing back a bunch of Bowie guys who were down there, like Kenny Robinson, who went and won a comp BNF, and some non-Bowie guys such as Greg Evans and Greg Barclay, who became life members of the club, and so they formed a nucleus. Probably 8 of them came back in the group.
And a lot of those guys, Barclay, Evans, Andy Easton, all played their junior footy at East Sandringham. Went to Sandy, played under 19s and seconds or first, you know, in Greg's case, and then kind of didn't have a senior club to go back to. So when they're finishing at Sandy, all the money clubs were probably offering them money, but you know, I think because of Johnny Mack and other guys that were coming back to the club, a lot of them came back, and we built that success of the 80s through those guys coming, and we always had a really good relationship with Sandringham. There was a day, I remember that David played in the mid-70s, you know, and there was only 18 in the team at Sandringham in those days in good VFA footy, and 9 of them were junior Beaumaris players.
And through the reserves and senior and thirds teams, there were at least 6 in every side.
Yeah.
6 Bowie kids. So I remember going to a practice match day when they were all playing against someone, and there was 20 odd Bowie kids playing in the different grades down at Sandy. So as Gary said, that was our club. Then what happened? We became a very strong club in South East Suburban, and perhaps would have gone on with this great bunch of players and won several flags. Except in '82, the Federal League, which was a real powerhouse, played very strong football and very high money, and that's how they got into trouble. The Mentones and Parkdales started to implode a little bit, and they were down to 7 teams, and money destroyed them. And the 7 teams wanted to merge with the South East Suburban, so they wanted to set a new competition up where all the teams came in level, everyone's recognised as life members, equal number of directors from both competitions, and the merger was lost by a vote at a public meeting of all the club, 2 delegates from all the clubs involved, and we very strongly supported a merger. We just felt it would have created a goodwill, and instead it was lost by a vote and it virtually became a takeover. So the 7 clubs from the Federal still came in '82, but some of them very resentful of the terms and conditions, especially
didn't have a lot of rights.
The guys from Hyatt who were from the Federal, who'd been the directors of the Federal Hyatt Footy Club, they were very put off. They went and formed the over 30s competition, over 35s, the Super Rules. But they came in, and 3 of them went into the second division, and 4 were put into the top 10 with the top 10 South East Suburban sides. In '82, they said, sort it out on the field. There's a 14-team draw. The top 10 Division 1 next year. It was unbelievable year of footy, very competitive. We had a very good side with Johnny Mack and some other guys. Clayton had won the last 2 premierships in the Federal League. Ashburton, captain coached by Pettigrew from Collingwood, with his brother playing and a few other names. had won the last two in the South East Suburban, and in round 2 we beat Clayton at home, and they couldn't believe it. They packed their bags, walked past our social club, because they'd been beaten by a team from the South East Suburban.
Yeah, I remember that.
They just could not believe that we had a team that could beat them, and they thought it was all a conspiracy and spat the dummy. And then we fought it out, stayed up in the top 10, and then in the grand final the two defending premiers met, and probably we saw the best game of suburban footy I've ever seen. Clayton and Ashburton. Ashburton 9 points up at the 30-minute mark of the last quarter. Clayton kicked the goal, and the ball went down to Ashburton's forward line, and the captain coach Pettigrew was on 99 goals, went up, looked like he took a pack mark, hit the ground with the ball sitting on his chest, and when he landed on the ground, it sort of dribbled out. The crowd expected it to be paid, it wasn't, so it left him on 99. They cleared the ball, ran it up, kicked the goal and won the game, Clayton, and I don't think the umpires got out of the rooms for, they reckon, for about 2 hours.
It was a fantastic game of footy.
Surrounded by Ashburton supporters.
They did fight on the ground, off the ground.
The best game of football I think I've ever seen.
Yeah.
They had a full-back who was from Fitzroy and was an absolute class. Just a really, there was a lot in it. There was a lot of emotion.
So that was 82, and then in 83, Ian Hutchinson, who was an absolute legend of the Sandy Footy Club, and both as a cricketer and a footballer in the area, came to coach, and you know, we got beaten in the prelim by Noble Park. Again,
by a goal after the siren.
Yeah, by a goal after the siren. And they went on and won the flag. So we were the minnows and of the competition, really. You know, in age group, in money we were spending on players.
Noble Park had poker machines, had 38 poker machines. At the moment they've got about 50 now, but at the time their reserves, every reserves player was getting paid $50.
Yeah.
Like,
they were spending more on the reserves than we were spending on as a total on our seniors, because they were getting $50 a win and they never lost a game. So, you know, 83 was a fantastic year, and we were very, very stiff. And then Noble Park went on and played Clayton again in the grand final, who were both from the Federal League. And the coach, young Mel Smith, played that day, and he was the up-and-comer. He played league football a couple of years later. And the coach of Clayton, who was a bad, bad man, Quinn, he came into our rooms after the game and said to Mel, well, it's just as well you didn't win, because I just would have had to have you fixed up before the game started next week.
And that's what happened in the grand final.
Clayton
went out to king hit and harass Noble Park, who were seen as a fairly clean ball-playing side. Hadn't had much success for 20 years. It was their first big win. And they overdid it, and they got it. The bloke sent off and reported and free kicked, and Noble Park got up, and a lot of it was televised and sent around the country for the viciousness of what some of the things Clayton did, and that sort of led to their downfall.
No, in fact, what happened was that there wasn't an order off rule in footy then, and Trevor Barker was at the game, and he went to the executive of the then Southern Footy League and told them it's the most disgraceful thing I've ever seen in my life, and they brought an order off rule, and it tidied up the footy, you know, because it was pretty tough footy, pretty hard footy, and particularly in preliminary first semi-finals, preliminary finals and grand finals. You never wanted to get 6 in front, you know, with 10 minutes to go.
Clayton Quinn, the coach, his brother was a double murderer in Pentridge. He came from good stock, and he was the one who was supposed to have kinged Jimmy O'Day at Cheltenham a couple of years earlier when he nearly killed him up there. So he had quite a reputation, and he didn't mind letting his players get out. And
was that before Jimmy hit Greening or after?
Yeah, I wonder, Because also, you've got to remember, there was one umpire in these days, too. You know, you play down, you know, in the twos, or you go out to Ashburton, or, you know, some of the clubs, and there's one umpire. He's up one end of the ground, and blokes up the other end of the ground doing whatever they wanted to do. So, you know, all footy now, all suburban footy's in just such a much better state now than it was certainly back in those days.
As Gary mentioned, Mel Smith, we probably omitted him in 77. Mel came into the seniors as he came up from the under-17s, had been captain of the 17s in '76 and came in and in a premiership year won the B&F, senior B&F. David at centre forward, he could play a bit, had great hands.
That's a phenomenal.
As an under 18 player.
To play centre half forward to man's footy. And in fact, in '76, Ron, he was captain of the under-17s. He played in the seconds premiership.
Oh, okay.
We brought him up. That was the one game of the year he played. It was his first senior game. So he played in a seconds premiership in '76 and a senior premiership the next year.
And senior B&F
His
at
son's
under
doing
18.
well at the moment too.
Yeah.
And then he went down to the Bellarine Peninsula, won 2 comp B&Fs, found his way back to St Kilda, played 1 game. Last game of the year, no one knew about it. Came back to Bowie, won the B&F again. And of course, as we mentioned, the 50th during the finals, that was his son Nick, who played in Sydney's premiership side.
And Mick was exactly very similar to Michael Kirkby, just best pair of hands, Mel Smith, you know, in the air. Him and Ken Robinson probably, and Jeff Skinner as the best pair of hands, but and beautiful handball, just couldn't kick. He was a dreadful kicking the footy.
Awkward kick.
And you look at Nick, this beautiful left footer, pinpoint accuracy. I keep reminding Mel that he certainly didn't pass that on to his boy.
So I suppose, when we got to the 80s and the mid 80s, and then Johnny Lawless had been a favourite son. Like he played in the '63 first year, '65 premiership, captained the '70 premiership side, coached the reserves to the grand final, lost by a point in 1980. We lost both grand finals in 1980. I lost to Mount Waverley by a point. Decided to go off and get some senior coaching experience. Went to Western, came back and got the senior job. Just wanted to learn more. Did a lot of recruiting, and then had the heartbreaking '86 when we kicked 8-22 and Noble Park, and we'd smashed Noble Park in the second semi on the back of Andy Moyer playing one of the great games, kicking 8 goals from the half forward flank. And Johnny had recruited him, and he'd recruited Andy Easton and some of the others, and we just couldn't get it through the big sticks, even though we had 60 or 70% of the play. So that was, and the same next year, finished on top and went out on the back of Ian Todd winning the comp B&F at centre half back, ex-Melbourne player. And
was that East Brighton?
Yeah.
East Brighton beating us?
No, that was a guy from Chelsea came down, and coached them. And so we went out zip in '87 and went into a bit of a flat spot then, because we'd had 2 close goes at it, and then stayed up, and then in '91 got into the Plym again under Johnny Aldrich, and by then Johnny Mack had made a comeback, and he'd been down to Warragul, played in the Latrobe Valley Senior Premiership side, and
he would have been 37 years old.
He rucked, and a young David McGeorge came up from the under-17s, and he was first rover on his way to captain Sandringham to 3 premierships and captain the Victorian VFL side. So we had a good side, and we mucked up on preliminary final day against East Brighton, and they went and won the flag.
Yeah, they were a good side.
They were a good side, and Johnny Bennett captain coached them, and then I think we hit a bit of a brick wall, and then we got to the stage where by '94 we were relegated when you took over. Gaz took over as coach, and did that for nothing. So he's the first guy for 30 years who coached the seniors without payment. Ronnie White hadn't been.
It's only because they didn't have any money, John.
Hadn't been paid. We didn't have any money, and we had a year in second division.
Yeah.
And by the end of the year we were back on business, where the club was going all right. And the end of the year we started pre-season training. We had 41 at training our first night. We were doing some recruiting. We'd made $17,000 in that year when we hadn't paid the coach, so finances were pretty strong, and we were going fairly well. And the South East Suburban rang up and said, we've got a problem. Dandenong Football Club had just folded in the VFA, if you remember. The back page of the Herald was the story about how they're going to do a Phoenix and come back as the Redlegs Footy Club. Why not pay their $250,000 worth of debts and start up all over again, not get back into the VFA, but the South East Suburban wanted to slot them in to the competition and said, "Oh, you better come over and talk to us. We want to look at the books and everything." We said, "Fine, everything's profit." And then they said, "Well, tough luck. We're going to drop your division because we want to put Dandenong in. They're a big name club. They'll give us a bit of credence." And the next morning we picked the phone up and rang Phil Stevens at the Amateurs. And that's how the amateur story started. That's one reason why we finished. There've been a couple of other things with the South East Suburban, and David was involved in one of them. We'd seen a lot of violence in some finals. They had the Caulfield one, Princess Park.
Well, that was in '94. Caulfield played Collingwood in, and it was just horrific.
It was just, and Caulfield had recruited one of the Sheedy family that were both well known, the nephew of Kevin, but of a legend at De La Salle, and he came from the Amateurs, played A grade, he kicked 8 of the first 9 goals, and of course we picked it, and there he was being carried off behind play on a stretcher, so that led to some massive blue at quarter time where I remember you had to pull the kids off the ground. We thought what was then the Southern Footy League was going in the wrong direction, and David came back to play and help out a mate, Kevin Gans.
No, it was Evo.
Evo
was coach.
Yeah, Evo.
Coach of the twos.
Playing the twos.
Sort of players.
And got king hit 100 metres behind play and had a depressed fracture of the cheekbone. And the guy who was thought to have done it, and we went to the executive of the South East Suburban, was cited by Noble Park 2 weeks later for exactly the same thing. Another player king hit behind playing a serious injury. And on neither occasion did they do anything about it, or would they follow it up. They said they were too scared of being sued. So that really was the end of their credibility. And then when they said that we're going to be relegated to allow Dandenong to come in, we picked up the phone and joined and made an inquiry about it. And the story that we've heard since was that when the call was put through to Phil Stevens, he thought it was a hoax because A, he lived in Beaumaris, and B, he'd been at a seminar of the executive the weekend before, and he'd presented a paper to the VAFA executive saying it's about time we started getting in some strong district clubs, like my local club Beaumaris that I run around the Oval. They've got a lot of juniors, they're a strong club, they seem to be pretty well run. Why don't we try and get a club like them in? So when someone came in on the phone and said, "Oh, Beaumaris Football Club's on the phone," he thought it was one of the guys at the seminar pulling his leg. He wouldn't believe whoever took the phone call, but it was me. And he came back and he said, "Well, if this is fair income, I want you around at my place tonight with a copy of your accounts and your constitution and a list of your office bearers." And within a week, the executive were in there and done and signed, because they had just kicked Faulkner out. Faulkner had the reputation up north of being a little bit too rough and tough for the VAFA. They'd expelled them, there was a hole there, and we got slotted straight in, and that's how we started with the VAFA.
So was it F Division or E Division you started?
E Division.
E Division.
And I was senior coach, and I had 2 concerns. One was, not that I was a big fan of drinking during a game, but I thought, will anyone come and watch if the bar's not open? So I thought that was a difficulty. And then I thought under 19 footy, that's bullshit. 19 years old, they should be playing senior footy. And on both sides, the accounts I've proved to be very wrong. The no grog is the best thing. In the old days, when you played Southern footy, if you played South Districts and you played in the twos and you had kids, you couldn't take them there in the afternoon because the twos players would be out on the booze after it and anything could be going on. And so you couldn't take the kids now. So now, when you see how family friendly it is, I think it's obviously brilliant. And then the other side of under 19 footy, which I thought, maybe wasn't that good for us. I realise now how important it is that guys mature at different age groups, and a lot of 17-year-olds give it away because they don't want to go to senior footy, and then all of a sudden they grow a little bit, so under 19 gives them a couple more years to grow into their body. And we did have a lot of fortune. So in '94, Sandringham, the VFA thirds was actually under 18, and Sandringham won the premiership. And in that premiership was Groves, Richard Maloney,
Anthony
both Blackies,
Warren Mills,
yeah,
all those guys.
So they then the under-18s finished. They had no under-18s there the next year in 95. So this whole VFA thirds premiership side came down and basically, not the whole, but certainly 12 or 14 of them came down and played footy with us. So this was our first year in amateur footy. We had an under-19 team that won a premiership, and that Chris Martin captained, I think. I think he captained that under-19. So all of a sudden, that was the nucleus of our senior side for the next. So that was very fortuitous for us that we could take this under-18 team. We got a really good coach in Rabs, Peter McBreety. So we walked in, we won a senior premiership and an under-19 premiership. Within 2 years, we then won D grade. The year after, we played in a grand final in C grade. So we went in with some real impetus, and it was, and that's what I think that was a really important part of the club. One, going to the Amos, but also being able to establish ourselves reasonably quickly in there.
When we finished up at the end of '94, we had Paul Sherman playing, and his background was his father was a 300 game amateur player, and he played with us strictly as an amateur. Had noted that he would want to play as an amateur, so in case he ever went back to an amateur club. And then we told the players what had happened. At the time, we weren't really paying money, we were paying an incentive, so if we had a win, they got a little bit more, and the best half dozen got bonuses, and so we weren't paying a lot of money, but we put it to the whole playing list. I don't think we lost a player. So in '95, when we joined the Amos, Davey was chairman of selectors, Gary was coach, and I was footy operations manager, so we're all quite involved with it, but we kept everyone. They all stayed on board and thought, oh, this will be interesting, let's see how it goes. And
the other interesting side is that to go from a club that was paying players to definitely, and you know, I still pray to this day that we've never given anyone a penny, and I don't think we have, but certainly in the days I was involved, and the different attitude of players, you know, prior to that, I had so many cases when I was in footy operations or whatever, and a guy'd come up to me and say, I don't care what I'm getting, as long as I'm getting more than him, because I'm a better player than him. So then when it was no one's getting anything, there was none of that pressure, no financial pressure on the club, no pressure, and everyone just played because they liked playing footy. And it just put a whole different culture through the place. We never had real problems with money, but it just took away that whole side of the game. And so we just had guys that wanted to play footy.
So did you start as coach in '94 or '95?
Yes, so I was our last coach in the Southern Footy League and our first coach in the Amos. Okay. And then so we won in '95, in '96.
We lost one game for the year.
In '95, yeah. In '95 we lost one game to the team that we finally beat in the grand final. And then in '96 we had a very good side. We lost quite a few out of '95 because again we got a lot of blokes to the end of their career, the Mark Halls and the Ian Bennett's and guys like this, and they all retired.
Tommy Mack got their flags.
And we rebuilt in '96 and really started to put a good side. We lost our first three. We went out to Parkside in round 4, and I reckon Luke McNicholas played his first game of senior footy as an under-17 and came up. And we went out to Parkside and everyone said, oh, you've got to be careful, they're the bashers of the MO footy. And boy, I'd like to send a few of them out to Ashburton in their heyday. and we won out there. We had a really strong win. Andy Easton was our captain. We had a really good win. And then we got to the point where we were, at half time of the last game of the year, we were on top of the ladder. We were in front at Commonwealth Bank. They got up and beat us by a point that pushed us to 4th.
First semi on a Sunday.
Yes, we trained on Friday night here for 20 minutes and I lost Andy Easton and Matty Quinn in 20 minutes of training. We went out to the Mazenod final, game, and it was unplayable. The ground was unplayable. So the two strength blokes I needed were Matty Quinn and Andy Easton, who were on the bench.
Dave Kinsella throwing up in the rubbish bin at half time. He went off to hospital.
He had a broken jaw, and the really good centreman that Matt Hanrahan brought down from North Old Boys, geez, he could play. Culnane, his name was. He went off at half time as well. So we were and got beaten by 8 points, and but that didn't matter. Then Moose, I gave it away. I had some work pressures that I had to give it away, and Moose came in then, and Moose was a fantastic coach, but a fantastic bloke for the club as well, I thought. And then came in, and so this under-19 team was coming through, so he built it on the back of, then he had Murray Pitts at his peak, and guys like that.
and then the next year Salisbury walked into the club too. So we're into 97, and Ronnie had recruited this kid from Caulfield Grammar, and funnily enough, we played them in what game?
We played Old Geelong in
Round 2.
About round 2 or 4, and before Salisbury played. They had Glasgow and Mark Neal, the current Melbourne coach, was their captain coach, Old Geelong. And Glasgow, one of the Glasgow brothers, was their assistant coach. They thumped us at Como Park at Old Geelong, and they knew that we were supposed to be fairly strong, and they carried on like they won a flag and really gave it to us. Actually quite rude. They didn't really invite us into their rooms. They had a luncheon I don't think we got invited to, and really we remember that very strongly. We got Aaron Salisbury and got him fit. He just won the Wangaratta wheel race, I think, as a bike rider. He'd been vice captain of the Victorian under-15 football side and developed OP and never got drafted.
Didn't play for 2 or 3 years.
No.
Didn't play footy for 2 or 3
So
years.
we got him back into footy. Met his dad, and he told us the story about him. I said, send him down. He said he'll train for a month, and if he gets through, we'll play him after the Queen's birthday weekend, which we did in round 9, his first game.
And we played Caulfield.
Yeah.
Caulfield Grammar, and Georgie Voyage, who was still involved at Caulfield Grammar, he saw me before the game, and he said, because Aaron had gone to Caulfield Grammar, and he said, "Gaz, I think we're going to get this kid in the next week or so who might be the best footballer in amateur footy." I said, "What's his name?" He said, "Aaron Salisbury." I said, "In fact, he's playing today." "Oh, is he?" "Yeah, for us." And I think he kicked 5. Look, it might be...
No, that was the return game against Old Geelong.
Okay, right, he kicked 5 in the first quarter. But in the game against Caulfield, he did kick goals in the first quarter, and Georgie Voyage just walked around shaking his head all day.
He was
we pinched him from...
For the level we were playing at, he was a class above, and by round 15 or 16, when Old Geelong came back to Bowie, his first 20 minutes of footy, 5 goals against the top side was good. At 20 minutes, as I've seen, and Mark Neal himself picked him up and actually crashed him into the ground near the fence and said to him one stage, "You're playing with the big boys now, Sonny," and Aaron got up and kicked another 2 in 2 minutes on him. So it was very good. And then in the second semi, we were dead level at half time against Old Geelong, but Aaron, we kicked 8-0 in the last quarter. Aaron kicked 8, 4 with his left foot and 4 with his right foot, and then we met him again in the grand final, and Aaron didn't have a good game. By then there was a lot of hype and publicity. I think every AFL club had a talent scout there down at Parkdale in 97. He only got 1 for the day, but we had Murray Pitts, who of course was All-Australian for 3 years.
Well, he won the Comp BNF that year.
Yeah, and we had plenty of others, and we had another Nicholson playing, another number 9, Benny Nico, David's young bloke, played in the 95 premiership side as an under-19 and the 97 premiership side, so he was the next generation. He's up in Queensland now.
Got a bit of the ball.
And Adam Catlin, the young Adam Catlin, one of our 300 game players, he was playing as about a 17 or 18-year-old. He was brought
and came on and had a real influence in the game.
For a bit of dash,
quarter,
a bit of
because
speed.
he ran with the footy and bounced. I remember a number of occasions where he took them on, and he really broke the game up a little bit for 10 minutes.
Yeah. And every one of the 7 premiership sides that Bowie's had, from 65 to 2010, has had an under-19 player. Actually, might have even had an under-18 player in every side. So it just shows kids are ready to step up and stand out, and there are some kids who don't want to play seniors till they're 20, but that's where the under-19...
Well, in 95, Ben Nicholson was under 19, but right from the start he said, "I don't want to play under 19, I want to try and play seniors." And so that was, so, and then Moose obviously went on. Then we played Hampton the next year in the grand final. We were clearly the best side. That was the day we were the best side and got beaten. We told you about a few times when the other side was the undefeated or the top side. We were clearly the better side of them that day.
Beaten
We
by
just didn't get it right. We
by
just
100 plus points in round 16, so that was quite a comedown.
And you know, had slippery conditions and had 9 blokes wearing bloody blades or something that slipped over all day. Just we were badly organised all day. No one's fault. It was just one of those things. So then we suffered, through C grade. We just couldn't pinch that C grade flag.
We played against Uni Blacks in what year, Ronnie?
Therry Penola in 2000
Yeah.
and Uni Blacks in 2005.
We were the better side against Therry Penola. Uni Blacks were a very good side in 2002.
But the good one we did get was 2003 because out of 2000, our under-19 team beat Old Scotch in the second division of the under-19s by a point. Unfortunately, they played away while the seniors and reserves were at Sandy. They were somewhere else. We never saw. I've never seen the game. Got up and won by a point. And
you will if you buy the DVD. You'll see part of it.
That promoted them to Premier Under-19 division. So for the first time ever, we had a team up playing Premier football. And I remember Johnny Collins managed the team and talked about how good Aussies were.
Yeah.
But it was a great learning curve for our guys. And then 3 years later, the nucleus of that under-19 side, the Sean Coots and the Atkins brothers, and that took us to a premiership against the current big guns, Collegians, in 2003. And in that team of 22, 21 had come through, had played junior or under-19 football at Bowie, and we'd recruited one big bloke, centre forward, Justin Bryce. He was down from Mildura. We found him because Ronnie and Robbie Buller walked into the Doyle's Hotel late one Friday night looking for a late beer and the wives to play the pokies, and there was a big barman standing there, and they said, "Oh, you look like you play footy." He said, "Yeah, I've just come down from Mildura." And they said, "Geez, you built like a footy." He's a big boy. And they said, "We should come and play Barry." He said, "I've started training in a club called Glen Ira." And I don't know what we did, but we harassed him and got him down, and he played centre forward in that premiership. He was the only non-Beaumaris guy. And a terrific guy. Came all the way down for the 50th celebrations. Yeah. And then of course, you know, you've probably done plenty on 2010 and where they are now with Jason. It's fantastic to see, and after all those 50 years, we'll see them run out in A grade.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What is interesting, you know, and it's been said many times, that from C grade, you know, what we were for many years were a strong C grade club that, and that's a great thing about the amateurs. You find your level of where you are, not as a team but as a club. And what we've been for many years is a really strong C grade club, and then we've gone up and battled in B grade. And I think, you know, Jason's had a big role in us showing some strength in B grade. Now we've only done it for a year, so we can't get ahead of ourselves. But you know, now our next challenge is to be a strong B grade club, and then a strong A grade club. And you know, whenever that comes, there's a hell of a lot more work to do to get there. But it took us 4 years to get to sort of B grade, and then 14 years to get to A grade.
But Ted King's right about wanting to win that A grade flag, because there are people from within the club and outsiders still remind me that the one thing the club hasn't done is we haven't won a premiership at the highest level of whatever comp we've been in. We've won C grades, D grades, B grades, second divisions, so on, but we haven't won the Premier Division flag, and that's after 50 years. Now we've had other great successes. Well, one of them's 23 AFL footballers now, and I don't know if you saw, but Callum Sinclair, who played in our under-16 premiership side a few years ago, got picked up by the Eagles yesterday.
Oh.
And got
He's not a Sinclair family, is he?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
He's the youngest, is he?
He was the one who kicked 6 or 7 goals against us in the under-19 grand final.
Yeah. And he... And Rab's got a letter from his father that night that I've seen. It's just so complimentary about how his year down at Beaumaris with Rabs was what turned him around, what motivated him, what inspired him, and what gave him confidence. And so all these years later, so he could become number 24. But that's one major success. And I think the other thing is we've all had a good time along the way. It's been we've had some great mates and some real characters. Bowie's always done things. We had the first Triple A football club ever to go up the snow in '77, and we won the flag, and we had a ball and
we lost a few players though. They took up snow skiing after that. That was a problem. It was fantastic.
It was a drawn grand final.
It was a drawn grand final when the aerial fell out the window and we didn't see the last 2 minutes.
We had a trip We had a trip on houseboats on Lake Eildon one year, which was again an absolutely fantastic trip.
And then we went down boats, another set of boats
Lakes Entrance.
at Lakes Entrance, and walked into a pub that the Chadstone team who we'd beaten in the grand final in the reserves a week earlier had walked into the same pub, and of course that got very messy and ended up very
messy,
very ugly later on.
Yeah.
With Nick Wern still has false teeth from that. So we've had a lot of fun along the way. We've met some great people and a lot of characters.
I do think one thing is that, you know, every club's probably got dickheads. I reckon they don't last long at a club. They just don't feel that comfortable there. And, you know, I think, and particularly right now, and again, I think Jason's got to take a role to do some credit for that, is that, you know, there's not many dicks in the club. A good bunch of kids, you know, and you even talk to Jude behind the counter in the canteen. She said this is the most respectful group of kids she's ever had there, and that's really good for the club, I think.
But that was started from day one, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. It was always there, and that's what I say. I don't know if they felt that welcome. Whereas, you know, there's certainly be other clubs that whackers would get to, and they'd be a part of the.
There's always been a family sort of values, respectful club to the senior guys, and and there's never been politics or faction. The club's moved along pretty well in that regard.
Yeah, good values.
We've always just swapped committees and people put their hand up, and there's been no arguments and big debates or anything like that. So it's gone
A
along.
lot of people willing to help out.
Yeah.
You know, like yourself over the years, who put so much into the club.
Yeah.
A lot of people willing to do that because it's the sort of club that they want to be involved with. So.
We've had a good time. We've had a good time. So I think a highlight, the end of this, these DVDs should almost be that first day this year, which is 50 years to the day when the first team ran out, Virtue.
Yeah.
And when we had that luncheon against St Bede's Mentone, it's interesting it's them because St Bede's were, in the old days, training used to be match practice between the Knicks and the Prods, and it was the Mentone Grammar and Bowie High boys played the St Bede's boys at whatever exercise they come up with, and here we're playing St Bede's in our first ever game.
But
St Bede's are filthy on us that we've got the home game.
I had they. Good.
Oh,
That's
so
good.
has that been decided?
Yes, we requested it. It was our first year up. That's
cool.
fair. So imagine the crowd there.
First day
First game of the
game, and I'm going to put an idea to the committee. I think it should be, the first invitees should be anyone who's interested in coming who was there 50 years ago, who played or was on the, like Peter Elder and was captain of the Mighty Midgets here. I'd love to find Paul Hankinson, Mick Kirkby, Bruce Smith, Lawless, people like that.
It's probably a reflection on the area as much as the footy club, but as we grew up and we're in juniors or coaching juniors, if there was a team of under 15 kids and there were 25 kids in the squad, then 10 or 11 would be Bowie High, 10 or 11 would be St Bede's, and one bloke perhaps from Mentone Grammar and one from Haileybury, and that was it. Now, well, there is no Bowie High, really. St Bede's certainly a few, but nothing like all the numbers now, and it reflects about the area, I guess, now that we live in. It's certainly, you know, in 1965, this was a suburb filled of war service homes, you know, our home in Cromer Road that David still lives in. Did you ever pay for that? Did I ever get my share?
Yeah, a couple.
You know, our dad came down here to an auction for the block behind Seaview Shopping Centre, so 40 or 50 blocks, and it was war service auction. You had to come back from the war to buy a block of land, and he came down, never been down this way, but you know, Ronnie was an asthmatic and they were told to get near the beach. And so that's what brought us in. My dad always said it was the luckiest thing that ever happened to him. But the area was made up of tradesmen, public servants, and
immigrants.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was tea tree, dirt roads made. There was
none of us had a beam.
The famous tramway parade in the Bowie pub, which was a resort. It was that far out of the city.
Dirt roads.
And what it was, Dunlop had bought a lot of the land, and they were thinking of setting up an industrial park down here and decided not to. So that's when the auction happened, and Dad bought the land for 200 quid, and that was a good buy then, and
Yeah.
his old man was just
In
to say, why
1954.
didn't you buy two? So
Yeah.
we moved in 55, and then, of course, Balmoras down on the beach and painted by McCubbin and become quite a trendy area, and a lot of interesting people have lived in Bowie, all sorts of characters and celebrities. And
But back then it was, you know, the wealthy guy was the guy that had the little printing business, or, you know, Maury Smith or someone like that.
yeah.
They were the well-to-dos. Everyone else were just battling along. But, you know, we had a great time because we had a beach, and then we had a footy club, and that's, I think that's probably worth, you know, it's probably the final, is that we were very lucky that we had something like that, certainly in our life, you know, to be able to, for my dad, I know how important it was to him. You know, our mum passed away when we were reasonably young, and so, you know, that footy club helped bring us up, whether they mightn't claim that as
And you know, Michael Roberts at the 50th talked about how when his dad Neil went down, had his year in the Antarctic, and how footy club was his home, and Gwen McLeod was his second mother. That's what it was like.
Very interesting that at Gwenny's funeral last month, some of the people that were there hadn't bothered to come to the 50th anniversary, the Johnny Joneses and people like that, but all came to Gwenny McLeod's funeral, because she was, you know, their thoughts of the Bowie Footy Club. And I thought that was really poignant.
If you had to name a game that was, I suppose, the greatest win for the club, what would it have been?
I already mentioned one of the candidates, the home and away game when we beat Clayton, who, for Bowie to beat Clayton in 1982 in round one was a bit like us now thinking last year playing in B grade, thinking we would beat Old Zavs or perhaps even playing Sandringham. It was massive. They were a highly paid club. They had a lot of ex-VFA players, powerful club. They won 2 flags in a row in the highest paid comp in Melbourne and perhaps Victoria. The Federal League used to play the Sanaful and often beat them. That's how strong Federal League footy was. So for them to come down here, and as I said, they were just so shocked. They thought it was a conspiracy of umpiring. One of their players got rubbed out for 6 weeks. He was about 6'4" and he hit our smallest player, Chrissy Powell, a hound, who was one of our guns, and they just thought they got a hard deal. But 2 blokes stayed there from Clayton that night, and they were still there at 10 in the bar, and they said, "You've got a bloody good football team here," and people didn't realise. I'd call that the most significant home and away. I thought
I wasn't there. I was out playing in the seconds at Clayton, getting the absolute shite belted out of me, so I missed that game. Look, the grand final of a few years ago, just because you're 45 points down, but look, I've been to every one of the premierships, and you know, over the years, the first one they were just a clearly better side, and we were all here and we were always going to win. 70, they beat an undefeated side. 77, we were underdogs, you know. So all the grand finals, I'd have to say, are comers for them. They're hard to beat grand finals.
Yeah, they're all special.
Yeah.
We've had some good underdog grand finals.
Yeah.
Very memorable, and there's no doubt that the people who play in premiership stick around, have come back more often and so on. Gary and I have just been on a golf trip that David sometimes comes on, except when his back's playing up, and it's virtually 33 years later, it's the 77 premiership side. That's the nucleus of this golf weekend.
And that's the Balmoras Golf Association, they call it. And that's come out of the footy club. And I'd like to think that a club like that, I said to them up there that if we do get into these new facilities, that should be the home base of the Balmoras, the BGA. You know, and even that I think can grow. And that's, I guess, the next era is the excitement of what we can do with the building down there. And again, what the footy club was set up to do was to provide facilities for the community. And you know, I think that's always been the main tenet of the club. You know, everyone wants to win premiership, but it's the role we play in the community, and if we can expand that and embrace other sports and other people and bring them into a community club, I think that's the next hole in the A grade, and then continue to develop this community club.
The story of the club, the 50 years going from those 4 teams, no offence, everything else, to become what is probably pretty close to the biggest Aussie Rules club in Australia, and have got up to A grade and have produced 20. Is a fantastic story, and the way we've done it, the harmony and the fun we've had, and the flags and all that. But we've produced some good people. So there's some well-known sporting people involved with the club, and journalists, and Harvard mathematician named David Marshall that I used to play with, and we've had some great people come out of the club. And now, as Gaz said, to be turning into their next 50 years and being A grade, and B having the new facility being developed, and I think C having about 27 teams next year is just sensational. It's a good story.
I think we're having a thirds next year, aren't we, John? Has that been?
Apparently, yeah, we've got this U-Butte coach we've recruited, and
we've got
I haven't told David he's assisting me yet.
What are you doing?
Well, they're putting in, there's now, so they have Club 18s, but this isn't Club 18s. They've now, in the MRs, they have first, seconds and thirds. And once you're in A grade, it's not compulsory yet, but it might be in a few years.
2 years away.
And so, I said to the club, if they do put a thirds team in, I'll coach it for a year. And as long as I've got an on-team, an on-ground.
I think you might find not everyone's got it this year, and you'll play triple letters all year.
Yeah. 8:30 in the morning, it'll be good fun.
And look, we've got a high-profile coach who's done a lot for the club, and I've heard one of his rivals from this year, Daniel Half, had set him up twice on the radio today, which was interesting.
Oh, did he?
Oh, yeah. About the Dale Garlett thing. So he creates some extra interest in the club. He's a very interesting guy, fascinating. So we've all agreed that at the luncheon we'll do our 6th interview in a row, and he'll become the longest serving senior coach.
Is that right?
Yeah, so at the end of 50 years, the first 5 years were one of our legends, the Major, Frank Reed, and the last 5 years were Jason. They both won a flag each, and both very memorable flags. One was the first one, and one was the come from behind, the last one, but the 45 points behind. So the whole 50 years has got a bit of symmetry about it, and we're ready to
Start the next 50.
have a crack. I just want to hear about a few more big recruits at the committees.
I don't know if we'll be
Got
here.
Tony and Johnny.
Don't know if we'll be here for the 100th, John.
well,
No, you might be. You're a young fellow.
And I do know
bit
that
at home somewhere.
at the 50th we started the concept of the Hall of Fame, so that's probably going to happen sometime in a few years' time, and get that moving along. We're ready for that now. It's interesting, we lost 5 well-known people around the club this year. We've probably just reached that age. We've lost Mick Kirkby, and Gwenny, and Ronnie White, and Lou Wilson, who was a great, we used to go to every year. He had the annual barbecue to start the season.
Sunday of the first game.
Yeah, and Jeff Lynch, who was a great supporter, great mate of Jerry Callahan's, and of course grandfather to Joe, our current Brownlow medalist. So it's starting to drop off the perch, and that's just the age of the club.
More and more of that, I guess. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Good luck.
I think I'll be doing a tape just with you boys.
No, I reckon.